So I got 10 minutes to talk about Wi-Fi and PKI, and that's pretty easy to do in 10 minutes. Just use it, right? We all probably are using, come on my friend, some kind of certificates in our installations. Now and then, quite often I run into people that say, oh, let's use preset keys and so on, but I would say that's dead in an enterprise environment. So a quick one, a 11i primer. Oh, I didn't mention, yeah, I said, oh, that's my entire name. You have to have 4 names, right? Just call me Olsen or Tor, that's fine. So a run on the 11i WPA2 primer, a quick introduction to public key infrastructure, and then some pointers on what to do when we're dealing with PKIs and certificates in general. So with WPA, Wi-Fi protected access, we have 2 main functions. We have encryption, we have authentication. When we're dealing with certificates, when we're dealing with PKI, we are focusing on the authentication part. So instead of using, say, a shared secret, a username and password, we'll be using a certificate in this case. When we're dealing with IEEE 802.1x, we have some EAP methods we'll be introducing, and you'll be needing a radio server of some kind. So with Extensible Authentication Protocol, you can see we have more than 70 different flavors. I did mention the LEAP. It's a no-go. It's not allowed to use, at least not in Denmark, where I'm from. It's illegal. Not really, but it should be. And then when we look into our components, I know that we have a session with something .1x later, so there you'll go into the details on that. You can see we have Supplicant Authenticated Authentication Server. I'm pretty sure that you already know that. When we're looking into some of the EAP methods we're using, we have non-tunneled and we have tunneled approaches. I really like the tunnel approaches. I like to keep things secret. With the non-tunneled, I've heard it earlier, that's the preferred one where we're using EAP TLS, where we have a certificate on the server and we have a certificate on the client. When we're doing that, we actually are revealing the client information. It's possible to see in clear text. You can sniff it. It's easy. With the tunneled approach, you have the option to put the certificate, the client information into a tunnel, and thereby it's not possible for anyone to see what the username is, for instance. So a quick one on this one. So when we're dealing with, actually when we're doing 802.1x, we need to have some mechanism where we should authenticate or verify a service of authenticity. You may know that we have something called EAP Fast. We can verify the service authenticity eventually, but with EAP Fast we have a phase 0 where we actually are pushing down a pack, and that's not protected. I would say you should use a certificate to protect that also. So implementing EAP Fast without certificates in my world would be a no-go. As I've stated up here, the most common approach to verify the server is to use a certificate. We'll have a certificate installed at least on the server side. So in order to verify that certificate, we will need to have a CA certificate or the issuing CA certificate installed on the client side, on the supplicant. So to protect the communication we can implement, we have the option to use some tunnel mechanisms for PEEP, EAP TLS, PEEP TLS, and so on. When we're dealing with our 802.1x access to our network. The non-tunneled, there will be EAP-TLS where we'll be using that. So with certificates, you can see the different methods we have, different purposes. With certificates, we have the option to use that together with an EAP-fast approach. Server side, did leave the ice in. I like ice. With the server certificate, you can use a PEEP approach where the server has a certificate, and then you'll create a tunnel, or not you, the client and the server will create a tunnel, and inside that tunnel you can send an MSCHAP authentication or MSCHAP authentication credentials. You can use generic token cards and so on. If we have certificates on the server and on the client, I actually mentioned that where we have PEEP TLS, that's also an option. And with certificate, we have so much information we can match on. So when you're sitting with your Radius server, you can match on whatever you like inside the certificate and create policies so you can differentiate on which access client devices, computers, and users should have. So the process of doing the server validation is the server sends the certificate down to the client. The client would look into the certificate, extract the CA signature, do a hashing of the rest of the certificate, take the CA signature, decrypt it with the public key it has from the CA certificate, and if the two results, the decrypted CA signature is actually the hash from the CA when the certificate was created, and if the hashes matches, then we have a certificate authentication, or we authenticated the server. Then when the server is sending messages to the client, it would sign it with its private key. And every time a message is received on client, the client could take the server certificate it received in step 1 and then use the public key in that certificate to verify the signature of the message sent by the server. Plain and simple. So for the infrastructure, what we need to have on the authentication server, we need to have, I'm stating that we need to have identity certificate that identifies the server, but as a starter, we actually need to have the trusted certificate issuer certificate installed on the server, and then we can have the identity certificate installed on that particular server. Windows, macOS, Linux, I'll not go through them all. One thing I can mention is that Windows has a really nifty feature. We can authenticate the computer and we can authenticate the user, not at the same time, but we have a certificate for the computer. The computer is an entity, at least when you have an object in Active Directory, and there you actually have the opportunity to authenticate the server before the user logs on. And that's fantastic. Once the user log on, the computer will log off, and then the user certificate will be used. So you need to have a certificate for each and every user that might use that computer. Oh, that's ridiculous. Nowadays we have our own computers, right? It's called a PC, a personal computer. Maybe not. And that's something I think that's really, really interesting or really good with Windows. I know that we can do EAP chaining in Cisco world, at least. We have AnyConnect, we can do that. So we actually have the option to do authentication of the computer and the user at the same time by implementing EAP chaining. But in general, it's not possible. Remember, the computer will log out, and then the user will have to be authenticated afterwards. So we have different certificate authorities. Go ahead and install. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have experienced the Active Directory certificate services. Really good, fantastic. You have some open source alternatives. One of them is the XCA that I really like when I'm when I'm investigating or looking into certificates. I can create my own certificate server, my own PKI on my laptop. I have a database. Remember, this is not something you should do in production, or at least you should have it on computer. You can lock down. You can have a offline root CA and all that stuff. But I really recommend you to go in and try to use this. It's a fantastic tool. I like it a lot. Gives you the opportunity to, come on, my friend. No, we're not doing that. To experience certificates. Thank you.